Good evening. We're ready to get started. Today we are learning Maseches Bava Basra, Daf Samach Gimel. We're starting 10 lines from the bottom of Samach Beis Amud Beis at the two dots. And we are going to be learning some complicated language cases, or I should say conflicting language cases. When a person makes a sale, Amar Rabba, and he says, Palga de Isli Ba'ara, half that I have in that land. That's what I'm selling to you. If I use this language of half that I'm selling in that land, then what do you get in the sale? You're the buyer. Palga. What if I say Palga be'ara de Isli, half in the land that is mine? We might have thought that this was simply a difference in semantics. So then you get Riva, you only get a quarter and not half. So says the Gemara.
You initially have half.
It says the Gemara, Amar le Abaye, ma'ishno hachi u'ma'ishno hachi. He said, what's the difference? These two languages sound the same. Why would it be that in one case you get Palga and in one case you get Riva? In the first case, you said Palga de Isli ba'ara. In the second case, you said Palga ba'ara de Isli. They sound very similar. So the Gemara says that Rabba was ishtik, that Rabba was silent. And Amar Abaye, Ana Sabre, I had thought that me the ishtik, that because Rabba was silent, kibule kibla, that he accepted my pushback. And really both of them were half. In both languages, you'd get half. Says the Gemara Velohi, that's in fact not correct. Chazinhu hanhu shtare de nafke mi beimar. I saw documentation, documents, shtaros, that came out of the Bezdin of Rabbah. Uchsiv behu hachi, and it said the following: Palga de isli ba'ara palga, palga ba'ara de isli riva. Exactly like Rabbah had said initially. So we don't really know why. We don't really know why it was the case that Rabbah was ishtik, why he was silent, because he definitely didn't agree with Abaye. All of that is model number one. And model number two, quite similar. The Amar Rabbah, same author as where we started. Meitzar ara dimina palga. This border that is mine, I want to give you half. So then you, the buyer gets half palga. Meitzar ara dimina psika. That if it was from the border that was psika, which seems to be the part that it was cut from, meaning a portion of it. So then you don't get half. You only get tes kabin, which the Rishonim explain is the smallest amount of a chashuv piece of land. So similar to the first case where the language deviated and then the buyer gets a different amount. In the first case, the language was more clearly palga, so he gets palga. In the second case, the language was psika, and therefore he only gets tisha kabin, which is a small amount of property. And Amar le Abaye had the same exact dialogue with Rabbah yet again. Ma'ishno hachi u'ma'ishno hachi, they should both be the same. And Rabbah similarly answered as he did in the previous case, ishtik. He answered with not answering and just sitting there quietly. What it seems over here is that Rabbah acquiesced to the concerns of Abaye, and the Gemara says again, Savor mina, Abaye thought idi v'idi palga, that Rabbah changed his mind and agreed that it would be half and half. Turning to the very top of Samach Gimel Amud Aleph at the first words, the Gemara says Velohi, that really it's not true. Rabbah did not change his mind. To Amar Rav Yemar Bar Shalmei, Rav Yemar Bar Shalmei said, Ledidi mifreshali minei de Abaye, that I heard in the name of Abaye as follows. Bein meitzar ara demina palga, whether the language was the border on this half of the border, ubein meitzar ara demina psika, where the language was you only get a psika, a part of the border. Amar le, if he said elain mitzra naha, these are the borders, and palga, then yes, you do get half. Lo amar le, the language of elain mitzra naha, that these are the borders, then you only get tisha kabin, and that does reflect the fact that Rabbah still held of the difference in language between palga and psika. Both of these cases basically summarize the fact that Rabbah was of the opinion that your language matters. And if you are not overly specific in what you want, it's possible that your sale won't go through the way that you want. So if I say, for example, you get half of my land and you get half of my land. If I say you get a piece of half of the land that I own, then you don't get half of the land, you get a quarter. That brings us to the two dots on Samach Gimel Amud Aleph, 6 lines down. Make that 5 lines down. Says the Gemara in a similar form, Pshita, it's obvious that Amar Yachlok Ploni b'nichsei, that if I say I'd like to split these properties with you, then palga, then you get half. Tnu chelek leploni b'nichsi, give a portion of my properties to Ploni, what would the halacha be? Assuming we're on the same warpath as Rabbah, we should expect this number to be less. And the Gemara, in fact, agrees with this based on a brisa. Amar Ravina Bar Kisi, Tashma, let's see. Tanya, we have a brisa. This is a brisa that is, what does it say on the side here? Ein ba'aruch erech bor pirush noch. Oh, that's not what this is. We don't know where this brisa is from unless this is its own Mari Makom. But Ravina Bar Kisi says we have a brisa. Ha'omer, if a person says tnu chelek leploni bebor, give the portion of my bor to Ploni. Sumchus omer ein pachos me revia. He only gets a quarter. So that is what we would have thought. That was what Rabbah told us in the other case. When your language is off a little bit, you don't get palga. And here the language was not, you get half of what I get. His language was, tnu chelek leploni babor, you get a revia. And if, the brisa continues, it's lechavis. If you're doing it for the sake of animals, and then I say that strange language of tnu chelek leploni lechavis, so then, ein pachos mishminis, then the buyer only gets an eighth. Now, the reason why the number changes is because no one would ever use more than half of what's in the barrel, which means if I'm selling to you, the most I'm going to sell to you is half of my half, which is a quarter. And Sumchus was of the opinion that you only get half of that, which means an eighth. And the math continues down the line. Likdera,
if I... The Gemara is using the expression both by the quarter and the eighth, not a quarter or an eighth, but no less. No less.
Correct.
Difference.
That's correct. Ein pachos mishminis or ein pachos mirevia. Yeah, well, I'm speaking about it in regards to just a revius, just to make it a little bit easier, but it's correct. It's ein pachos. So then says the Gemara, what about likdera? What about for food? Ein pachos miyud beis. Because here a person, we wouldn't have known this without the Rishonim, here a person would never use more than a third of the food available. And therefore, half of a third is a sixth, and half of a sixth is a 12th. And that's how Sumchus would have parsed out the food that's available. What about litfiach? What about I just want to get a cup of water, and I say to you, or you want to get a cup of water for me, I say tnu chelek leploni litfiach, just to give him a cup of water. Ein pachos mishisha asar. Then it would not be less than 1/16. And the math would be, according to the Rashbam, according to the Rishonim, that if you have 1/16, that's eighth and fourth, I would never give up more than a fourth of my water to give to a friend, which means that I'm for sure not giving him a fourth. At the most I'm giving him is an eighth, but the least I'm going to give him is a 16th. So that measure between a 16th and an eighth is what we are discussing. I know these numbers are a little complicated, but the point over here is that Rabbah is doubling down and tripling down. That when we have a case scenario where the language isn't clear, the outcome isn't clear either. That's really the ikra nakuda. If I say, you get half of my property, then you get half of my property. If I say, you get a piece of half of my property, the outcome is totally different. And then we have to figure out what is considered the reasonable amount to give you. And it's not going to be half of my property. It's going to be a lesser amount. Tanu Rabbanan. Somewhat changing gears in the topic, but still a similar frame of confusing language. Ben Levi, a person who is himself a Levi, shemachar sada Yisrael, and he sells a field to a regular Israelite, a regular Yisrael, halfway down on Samech Gimel Amar Aleph. The Omar Lo, and the Levi stipulates in his sale, Almanas shema'aser rishon sheli. I'm selling you this property. It's yours. But I'm making a stipulation in my sale that I'm a Levi and I get to keep the Meiser Rishon. Halacha l'maisa, Meiser Rishon shelo. A Levi is allowed to make this stipulation in the sale, such that if the Levi sells his field at 123 Main Street, he sells it to Phil, I'm a Yisrael. I almost wasn't. My father just came back from a trip, and there are Kohanim on the women's side of the family. Your grandmother, Katie? Your grandmother, Katie? So she was Bas Kohen. It almost happened. It's on the wrong side of the bloodline, but it was close. Now I'm a regular Yisrael. But let's say that he says to me, the Levi says to me, Phil, you're a Yisrael. I want to sell you my field at 123 Main Street, but b'tnai that I get the Meiser Rishon. The Gemara says that works. The Brisa continues, V'im Amar li ulebanai. If the Levi says to Phil, I'm selling to you, but I and my sons get to keep the Meiser Rishon, so then only when it's Meis Yitain Lebano, he gets it during his lifetime, and the Levi's children gets it after the father dies. In other words, it stays within the bloodline based on the stipulation at the time of sale that the Levi says, I want to keep a hold of this.
Isn't there something to the effect that a Kohen cannot force the Yisrael to get.
This is not a Kohen.
But I'm saying slightly different. But a Kohen cannot force the Yisrael to get his truma. The Yisrael can give it to whoever.
There's no forcing. You don't have to buy my property. You can buy my property. You're Yisrael. You can buy my property. That's great. But there's a stipulation. You don't have to buy my property. But if you do, there's a stip. I'm not forcing anything. You can decide if you want to buy it. I'm not forcing anyone's hand. What?
That was my question.
Oh, okay. Yeah. No, there's no forcing. This is a regular transaction. I'm just building in a stipulation. You don't like the stipulation, don't buy the property. I'll go find somebody else. But I want to be able to keep my Meiser Rishon. There's no forcing here. I presume that that's the right answer. I don't know. I didn't look into the Rishon. I'm reacting. The Amar lo, if the Levi's stipulation to the Yisrael when he sold the property at 123 Main Street was Kozman shesadezu biyodcha, for as long as you're the owner, that's when I get my Rishon. Then, if Machra, if the Yisrael sold it to a third party, and he repurchased it because it was interrupted by a new owner, Ein lo alav klum. Then the Levi's stipulation died at that first sale, in which case the Levi only gets it until I, the Yisrael, sell it to the third party. Once I sell it to the third party, even if he sells it back to me, the Levi no longer has any rights. Now, on this whole concept of a Levi creating a stipulation on future produce, asks the Gemara a classical Shas question. Amai, why would any of these stipulations work? After all, Ein Adam Makna Davar Shelo Bal Olam. You and I cannot transact about something that hasn't happened yet. Now, there's Machlokas Tanoim about this, Rav Meir and others, but for the assumption of the Gemara, if the Levi says to me on January 1st of 2024, I get all of the Meiser Rishon for the next 10 years that you own this property, Afal Pi that none of it has grown yet. It's a violation of the transaction rules of halacha. You're not allowed to make a kinyan when it's a davar shelo bala olam. So says the Gemara, Alam Desha response. The Gemara says 5 lines from the bottom, Kevan de Amar le, since the stipulation of the Levi in his sale of the property to Israel was Al Menashe Meiser Rishon Sheli, I'm stipulating that the only way this sale works is if you give me Meiser Rishon. What does that tell you about the sale? Says the Gemara, shiur shire lemakom meiser. What it means is that he actually owns an aspect of the property such that we don't have the question of davar shelo bal olam. I own a certain number of granules of dirt. I don't know exactly how to explain this, but I still own a portion of the property. Enough of a portion that would give me the rights to the Meiser Rishon without it being a davar shelo bal olam. Says the Gemara, as a tushtel from here, Amar Reish Lakish, Zos Omeres, this teaches me something else. And this something else goes in the face of what we learned a couple of days ago. Reish Lakish says, this teaches us that Hamocher Bais Lechavero, if I sell my house to you, Ve'amar Lo, I'm selling you my house, Al Menas Shediyuta Ha'elyona Sheli, that the upper aspect of your house is mine, the diyuta is a porch of some kind on the roof. So if that's the case, diyuta ha'elyona shalom. So we're seeing that just like by Meiser Rishon, we have a case like that where the Levi can stipulate as long as the buyer agrees. So too between regular sales. Forget about Meiser, forget about halachic stuff. When I sell my house to you, I get to keep the roof if that's what I stipulate. Now there's a problem. The problem is that at the Mishnah, at the open of this parak, we learned that already. We learned that a roof with a makkah is precluded from a sale. That was the Mishnah that we saw just a couple of days ago at the open of the parak on Samech Aleph Amud Aleph. V'loes hagag bizman sheyesh lo makkah gvos artvachim. So what is this tushtel, Reish Lakish? That's ABCs. That's a Mishnah. And obviously Reish Lakish is not wasting his breath. Let's turn to the top of Samech Gimel Amud Beis, and let's see what it is that is the chiddush of this case of Reish Lakish. We'll be learning to the bottom of this Amud, 2 lines from the bottom, and then we'll be stopping. Tomorrow is Wednesday. Okay, so only one more blot, Samech Daled. And then, oh, good. Okay, great. We'll be fine.
What's after?
I didn't mean to share all my feelings out loud. They fell out of my mouth. I know. Get the... So it says the Gemara, Lemai Hilchasa. Says, look at this beautiful Rashbam. Lemai Hilchasa Reish Lakish De'ahani Tuna Eha. His stipulations work. Lemehabed Yuta Elyona Shalo. Habalav Hachihu Shalo. De'amocher Habayis Lamocher Yuta Elyona. So it's an express Mishnah in Samech Aleph. What are you talking about, Reish Lakish? So says the Gemara, don't worry, Reish Lakish was a Talmud Chacham of the highest caliber who does not need our praise. Machlokas Amoraim about Reish Lakish's opinion. Rav Zvid Amar, that what he means is that even though I made the sale, and even though I own the top of the house, I still have a latitude not just to own the house and use it. I can even extend beams from the roof that I owned, even though I sold you the house, no problem. Rav Papa Amar, a totally different sushtel. What did Reish Lakish mean? That if I wanted to build on top of that roof, and we won't see this here today, but really the building had fallen and now we're rebuilding, you're allowed to rebuild the roof. So says the Gemara, wait one second. Reish Lakish's whole language was zosomeres. That means what I see over here, I can extend to over there. That's what zosomeres means. What you're saying over here is zosomeres. That teaches me I can say something else. But the language of zosomeres only works according to Rav Zvid. Bishlamala Rav Zvid. Rav Zvid is at least on the reservation. Hainu diktani zosomeres. What did we see in the case before? We saw that the roof can't be sold. What was that a tushtel from? That was a tushtel from the Meiser Rishon goes to the Levi. So tushtel, so to buy the house. And you own the house. Just like the Meiser Rishon goes to the Levi even after the sale, so too I can build zizan on my roof after the sale. That's a tushtel. That's what a zosomeres is. But Elul Rav Papa, my zosomeres, rebuilding a building after it falls down. What is rebuilding a building? You have to do with the din of Meiser Rishon with a Levi. No connection at all. Kasha. Staka, very good question, says the Gemara. Beautiful. That brings us to the 2 dots, 5 lines down, Samach Gimel Amid Beis. Let's continue. Amar Rav Dimi min Harda. Hayman de Mazbin le Beisa lechavrei. I'm selling you my house. Afal gab de kosav le, even though I wrote in the shtar, Omka veruba. I wrote down the depth, I wrote down the height. It's architectural plans. Still, you are not kone the bore and the dos. You're not kone the pit and the cistern, which is actually, if you just look on Samach Dal, that's mamash our next Mishnah, loas habor v'les dos, and we're going to be analyzing that Gemara a little bit early because that's what we see here. Even though my agreement, my sale agreement with you stipulates the om kavaruma, but you don't acquire the bor and the dos, because the only way that works is tzarich lemichtav le, quote, kani lach mitahom arav ad rom rakia. The only way that a bor is sold while in a house is if I write in the contract everything from the depths of the earth below my house all the way up to the heavens. Let's assume this is true. What if I am selling a house with a pool? Does that mean that the pool is not part of the sale? Let's say I have a mikveh in my house. Does that mean that it's not part of the sale? Assuming that I only use the language of omka viruma. If I use this broader language of from the belly of the earth all the way up to the heavens, okay, I understand. That makes it. So I don't know. I don't know how we apply it. I know the bore had a different function. It was to store water for drinking. Pools are not meant for that. Mikvah, not recommended to drink mikvah water. So there's a lot here that we would need to apply to modern day era because some of our sales may not be chal in a full way. If I have a pool in my house, which I don't, if I did and I sold you my house and I just gave you regular the property at my address in this pin, this lavdafka that the pit inside my house is sold, lavdafka. My timer says the Gemara. The Gemara says the omka veruma bistama lokani. In general, just the dimensions, it's not enough to make a kinyan of the bor and the dos. Ahani umka veroma lemikna umka veroma. Yeah, you can tell me the house is 30 feet wide by 50 feet long. I understand that. That's simple. And also, ve'ahani mitahom ara ve'ad rom rakia lemikna bor v'dos u'mechilos. I understand. I understand both sets of languages. The super broad language of from the core of the earth straight below my house all the way up to the heavens. Yes, of course. You will then get the pit in the house, the bor, the dos, and the tunnels. No problem. But omka veruba, if all I said was omka veruba, you don't get the pit. And not only that, if I dug a tunnel under your house, mutter, you don't own all of the earth beneath my property. Lema misayele. Perhaps this supports the Mishnah that's on the next Amud. Veloas habor veloas hados. Afal pisha kosav lo omka veruma. This sounds exactly like what we just learned, which really is a kasha. Why? Because Why is it that Rav Dimi is teaching me this din if it's a Mefurish Mishnah on Samach Dalad Amud Aleph? If you would have thought that with the language of Umka Varoma you are Kone, Lehani Umka Varoma lemikna bor v'dos mechilos. It might have seemed that language should have worked, says the Gemara, and really it should say lo tzricha. That's what it says in the Hagos Habachir. Rav Yoel Circus adds in over here lo tzricha de lo kasable. Says the Gemara that perhaps what our Mishnah means on Samach Daled when it talks about our case is that it didn't say Om Kavaruba, and maybe you're right. Maybe Om Kavaruba does work. There's only one problem. Look at the Mishnah on Samach Daled Amud Aleph. It says Afal Pisha Kasav Lo Om Kavaruba. That's what the Gemara says here. Afal Pisha Kasav Lo Ktani. The Gemara says, I know what it says on Samach Daled Amud Aleph in the Mishnah, but it's wrong. And we're going to change the text of the Mishnah. Hachi Kamar. Really what the Mishnah means on Samach Daled when it talks about V'lo Sados, V'lo Sabor, the other way around, V'lo Sabor, V'lo Sados, is as follows. 4 lines from the bottom. Afal pi shelo kasavlo. Even though when I sold my house, I didn't use the language of Om Kavaruma. It's kimisha kasav dami lemikna Om Kavaruma. It's an assumed language. It's as if I wrote it in and said Om Kavaruma. Lemikna bor v'dos mechilos. When it comes to those things, he kasav la Om Kavaruma kani. Lo kasav lo kani. And we see over here that there's a split in the Gemara, that perhaps our Mishnah is talking about a case where you are, in fact, Kona the Bor Vidos, just by writing Om Kavaruma. We're going to stop right here, right before another question on our sugya, and we'll pick up in Mir Hashem tomorrow night. Wishing you all a beautiful night. Yeah.